oh God, when I first saw Swami, I was 40-some, I guess. That brought resolution in a way nothing else could have. I was leading a satsang somewhere and somebody said, would you tell us your greatest experience? Immediately, without any thought, a response came and I said, the greatest spiritual experience I've had is the experience that everyone is having all the time. That is, that I'm aware that I exist. Each human, each being, is a palpable physical representation of God pursuing himself, herself. God is almighty. God created everything. The creation arose out of God. So if God wants to find himself, which is basically what a human with a soul is God pursuing himself. It's only a matter of time. And you can, if you study the real writings about Native Americans, and I'm part Cherokee, you'll find this to be true. The tribe would tend to follow the alpha male. If he can dominate me, he will protect me. Whatever's happening in my life, there's an event in my life, and I always look at that event and I say, what's behind that? What's the teaching behind that? What's the truth? What's the greater truth that's being shown? And I realized that the only being that's capable of recognizing Shiva would be Shiva himself. I could never recognize Shiva as a person. No human could ever recognize Shiva. Only Shiva could recognize Shiva. So what happened in that moment is Baba, within that subtle nature and capacity to feel within, recognized Baba without. There are certain thoughts or concepts that I could no longer break down or destruct. One of those is that to honor no future possibility with greater reverence than the stillness that is with me now, that is always with me. All these things in my life led me on an intense spiritual quest. And in 1990, July, I ended up in Puttaparthi to meet Sathya Sai Baba. He had come into my life a couple of years earlier through dream, what we call a dream, but it was not a dream. But when I sat for darshan in July 1990, eagerly awaiting the vision of this, what should we call Baba? This great holy man, this avatar, this unspeakable presence in a human form. And
Did he touch you this way at first? Did he touch you this deeply upon first
that great
contact?
moment, in that great moment when Baba stepped on the veranda. And wow, it was more than I bargained for.
Mystic, mentor, self-evolved, deeply spiritual. Allan Morelock. His story of coming of spiritual age, starting with his very first memories of this lifetime, carrying through with his conscious introduction of holy man Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Welcome to Souljourns. This interview was recorded in the summer of 2010 in Sommerset, New Jersey, USA.
Allan Morelock, thank you very much. Welcome to Souljourns. I was thinking about this a second ago. I've done, in 44 years of journalism, who knows, maybe 10,000 interviews. I've never started one this way before. and I mean to start it quite seriously. Who are you and why are you here?
Oh, why? Why? I don't I don't know that I can say who I am. I think to ask a question, who I am, is presuming something that I don't necessarily presume when we say who I am. It's suggestive of a person, a type of person. And I could talk for hours about the implications of all that. So I'll just talk about the personal part. I'm a simple person. A simple man, lives a simple life. Grew up, was born and grew up in the mountains of East Tennessee. Very simple life in those days. We could say we were a poor family, though we didn't register as being poor. It was just how everybody in that area was. In the summertime, we didn't wear shoes. We had no running water. We had no bathroom facilities. We did have electricity when I was quite young. But there were 4 children, 2 adults, in a tiny, tiny house. And lived a very simple life, very close to nature. And today, living in New Jersey, have a landscape business. I've raised 3 children. Wife is deceased. Now have 4 grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 wonderful grandchildren. Why I'm here? Why? I think to say why I'm here, it's a question that I ask myself frequently. Meaning, when I look at that question, why I'm here, I don't know if we want to talk about that in the context of this interview, but I would use that question to interrogate myself, sense of what does life want from me now? At this point, what can I contribute to life as a person? I think in the early days of a person's development, speaking for myself primarily, I would tend to ask, what can I get from life? What do I want from life? What do I want to achieve? What do I want to become? That question doesn't arise for me very much now. The question that really haunts me is, what does life want from me? What gift can I give life? What can I offer? What can I offer the infinite mystery of life? As though I could offer anything other than what's already existing, but still, it moves me to ask that question.
And have you come up with any answers?
No, I'm always asking. I'm always asking.
I'm intrigued powerfully after reading about you, about your early spiritual understanding. Not only does it go back to your early childhood, if I understand you correctly, it goes back to pre-childhood, pre-infancy.
That's correct.
Could you elaborate on that?
Well, when I was little, I meaning here the personal Allan, following the birth event, as far as I can extrapolate through the events that have ensued, around the age of 3, probably 3 3/4, was physically mature enough to get away from the family for the first time. We had a little farm on the side of a mountain, and I got away by myself and walked up on the hillside, probably about or 500 yards from the house itself. And I looked down on the house, and it made me realize that I was being convinced that I was a human, that I had been born and was a human. I remembered my nature as infinitely free. I could feel the struggle to have the body cooperate with my intention. I noticed how cumbersome, if not impossible, it was to communicate through this human form. It was a terrible, terrible moment for me. I concluded in this very primitive mind that was just forming at the time, I concluded that I had been kidnapped from my real home. I concluded that somehow these humans, or these creatures, I didn't even know they were humans at the time, of course. I concluded that these creatures had somehow kidnapped me or captured me from my real home.
And turned you into a human being.
And they had not turned me into a human. I experienced that there was a process like hypnosis. I mean, I didn't have an idea of hypnosis at that age. I had very, very little conceptual framework. But the conceptual framework came later when I began to understand things like hypnosis and but I concluded that I had been kidnapped, and somehow these people were trying to convince me that I was one of them. It was a terrible, terrible moment. It was very difficult, very troubling. And in the midst of that, I took two vows. The first vow I took was I would never forget my nature. No matter what they did, I would never, ever forget that I am free, that my nature is free, that I'm not limited to a human form. I'm not something that can be bound by form and time.
Mm-hmm.
I took a second vow, and I forgot the second vow until 1990, July 1990.
So decades went by without you being remembering it.
The second vow, yeah, I forgot it. It ran my life. It ran me, and in a very real way, but mostly kind of subconsciously. And then it certainly did. It did some things that were good and some things that were bad. It made it very difficult for me as a child and growing up, and as a teenager. It made it very difficult for me to relate with and associate in a normal way, what we call a normal way, with all the other people. And if I dared mention any of this to someone, it well, it didn't go over well. I became involved in the church, and that was the last place I could talk about these things. The church seemed to have some sort of nebulous presumption that wasn't really even addressed, that we came out of nothing and nowhere, and we were either going to go to heaven or hell. So there's no way I could find or resolve what was going on inside me.
So what was that vow?
The second vow I'd forgotten. So what happened is all these things in my life led me on an intense spiritual quest. And in 1990, July, I ended up in Puttaparthi to meet Sathya Sai Baba. He had come into my life a couple of years earlier through dream, what we call a dream, but it was not a dream. But when I sat for darshan in July 1990, eagerly awaiting the vision of this, what should we call Baba? This great holy man, this avatar, this unspeakable presence in a human form. And
Did he touch you this way at first? Did he touch you this deeply upon first
that great
laying eyes?
moment, in that great moment when Baba stepped on the veranda. And wow, it was more than I'd bargained for. Far more than I could have expected. But I remembered the second vow. In fact, if you read the 1,008 names of Baba, one of those names is, he's the keeper of vows.
He's the keeper of vows.
He's the keeper of vows. But the second vow was I would find my way back. Whatever it took, I would find my way home.
And these two vows you made when you were 3.5
Yeah,
years
yeah,
old.
yeah.
Long before, as the Catholic Church taught me, I was even to the age of reason, the age of logic.
Well, luckily you are before the age of reason and logic. Because a child's mind is not corrupted by reason and logic. It's not limited by that.
Let me just ask quickly, what do you think it was about casting your gaze upon the form of Sai Baba that brought this long dormant vow back to your consciousness?
I think it was reality, recognizing reality.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of Indian friends. I've associated with many types of Indian languages and cultures. India is not India is not one country. It's numerous countries with one name. But I began to notice that something very strange to me is if I was sitting with someone from Tamil Nadu or from Sri Lanka or from Andhra Pradesh, there could be 100 other Indians in the crowd, but if there was one of those people from their state, they would immediately recognize it. I began to wonder about why would they recognize that guy? And I realized we recognize that which we know ourselves to be.
Instinctively.
Yeah, there's an instinct, there's a natural way of recognizing that. And then when I thought about, I always take events in my life, and I know that whatever's happening in my life, there's an event in my life, and I always look at that event, and I say, what's behind that? What's the teaching behind that? What's the truth? What's the greater truth that's being shown? And I realized that the only being that's capable of recognizing Shiva would be Shiva himself. I could never recognize Shiva as a person. No human could ever recognize Shiva. Only Shiva could recognize Shiva. So what happened in that moment is Baba, within that subtle nature and capacity to feel within, recognized Baba without.
Mm.
And that somehow brought back, that resolved this, oh God, when I first saw Swami, it was 40-some, I guess. That brought resolution in a way nothing else could have. And I'd been practicing meditation for many years and other spiritual pursuits for many years. And there were a lot of rewarding, fulfilling experiences along the way. In fact, I taught meditation itself for about 12 years from 1970, from 73 up until about 85.
You started with TM and learned it?
Yeah, I learned, I first met Mahesh Yogi in 1972. Prior to meeting Mahesh Yogi, around, I was about 19 years old. When would that have been? 1969, I think. I had a girlfriend in high school, and she wanted what I call white picket fences. And I was very drawn to her, I loved her very much. And I didn't want to leave her, but I didn't want the picket fences. I was a Peter Pan, you know.
No borders.
Anyhow, but then she decided to marry someone else, which was far more appropriate for her. But it devastated me. And it put me into such a tailspin, such an emotional quandary of being drawn to the things of this world and yet being repelled by the things of this world at the same time. Which is, it's very classic, really. It's a classic breakdown. Even if you read the Yoga Vasishtha, which is probably I would say most people would agree it's the greatest text regarding yoga of all. Certainly one of the most voluminous books ever composed. Rama went through this horrible, Sri Ram went through this horrible breakdown at an early age, which prepared him for Vasishtha's teaching, and Vasishtha's bringing him on board to what we call the higher reality. I say what we call the higher reality because from the perspective of the higher reality, there's nothing other than higher reality.
Mm-hmm.
It's the capacity to conceptualize things, conceptualize life, that give us this reductionistic experience of something that's not the higher reality.
And when you were a young child, that's what you made, that was the object of your vow to one day return to.
Yeah, you could say that. Could say that.
So through the romance and the dissolution of it and other trials and tribulations, those all happened during the period when you were not aware that you had made that vow, and it must have left you...
Yeah, I'd forgotten the vow. I just knew that something was pushing me not to accept the white picket fences. Mm-hmm. And the white picket fences is symbolic. I'm just using it as a symbol for... Anyhow, let me just say what happened at that point. So it put me into this huge tailspin, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I knew I wanted something more than when I looked at my elders and the people around me, they looked like robots to me. I said, well, what is this all about? These people, my dad gets up in the morning, he has his breakfast, he drinks his car, he goes to work, comes home, sits, watches TV, does a little work, goes to bed. Nothing else. Goes to church, but it's just a routine. There was no deep meaning in it.
Pretty mechanical.
So I thought it's all robots here. This is a completely different mind than at 3 years old. And anyhow, so I went into this tailspin, and I began desperately seeking or searching. I didn't even think it was searching at that time. It was just kind of a desperation that was driving me. And one day my mother said, in sort of desperation, because my hair was getting long then, and I was starting to use drugs and experiment with anything and everything. I was losing interest in the education, although I had straight A's in physics and math, and was on a course to become an engineer or scientist or something. And she said, what is it you want? She was upset. The whole family was upset. I was basically being disowned. I was this total black sheep. And I'm so grateful she posed the question with that intensity, because I had to define what it was. And I thought, she really got my attention. I stopped and I thought, I want knowledge. I want knowledge. I want real knowledge. And then once I had that point, I thought about it very carefully and very deeply. And I began to break life down. And I thought, first thing I had to think about There were basically four main things I thought about. First was, what about my career, finances, all that? Am I willing to risk it in the pursuit of knowledge? I said, okay. It's okay if I have a great career and become wealthy and don't have knowledge, it's wasted anyhow. Secondly, I had to think about, let's see, family, I think. Family and friends. So I consider, what if in my quest for knowledge I lose all my family and friends? What if they desert me, disown me, and I'm really alone? You know, I was a teenager then, and I said, I had no one to talk about, someone to discuss this with, but somehow I thought in my mind, even if I have a lot of friends and a lot of family and a lot of close people, even if I'm famous and everybody knows me, if I die without knowledge, what's the point? What have I gained? Then thirdly, I thought about, what about my physical health? What if I have to give up my physical health for this pursuit of knowledge? Because I don't know if I'll really find knowledge or not. Maybe I'll die without the knowledge. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to die anyhow. Body's going to go off anyhow, one way or the other. So I threw that in the fire of this need for knowledge. And then the last thing I had to grapple with, what about my sanity? What about my sanity? What if I go totally insane in my quest for knowledge? This was the most difficult thing for me. This was the most difficult hurdle. And I sensed it was the last hurdle I had to breathe very deeply and consider it. And not for days, there was a few minutes. Finally, I threw it in the fire and I said, okay, this is my quest. I have to have knowledge, whatever it takes.
In spite of those risks.
In spite of, I will risk anything and everything. I think that was, that marked a certain beginning point in my trajectory. Shortly after that, I engaged in the use of a lot of things like marijuana, LSD, various substances like that.
Mm-hmm.
And these substances did give me a taste of something greater than the capacity, the normal capacity of the functioning mind. It did show me something bigger and vaster and something outside.
Did it show you knowledge?
Oh no.
It just expanded.
Knowledge
your
was not
awareness.
revealed in that. I'm not saying it can't be. I can't answer that question. I don't recommend it as a path unless you have a very, very highly elevated guide. I'm not saying it's not a path. I'm just saying I don't recommend it unless you're very, very. You must have a very, very, very good guide in that path.
And Jody's curious to know, what did you mean by knowledge? What does the knowledge mean that you were seeking?
All I knew at the time was that knowledge I was seeking had to include my experience previous to birth.
And is that equated with truth, or is it separate from truth?
At the time, I wouldn't have used the word truth. I mean, you could use them interchangeably, I would say. No problem.
So I interrupted.
Knowledge was just the word that came in my mind. Truth didn't come in my mind at that time.
And I interrupted you. You were into your experimental days. Then.
Yeah, I went through a period of you could call it experimental, and then the mind was broken down to such a point that I was on the verge of being completely dysfunctional. And then I heard about meditation. I read a book or something, and I tried this meditation through the instructions of a book. And it had a nice flavor for me, but there was nothing really going on. And then very soon after that, I saw a picture of Mahesh Yogi. That got my attention because I had long hair, he had long hair. And it was about meditation. So I went to a talk, and the instructor said, and I was using quite a lot of marijuana at the time. I smoked marijuana continuously throughout the day, and it was very, very strong stuff. As soon as the instructor said you have to give up drugs to learn meditation, immediately I dropped it, without a second thought.
That's amazing all by itself.
Because the only reason I used anything was the pursuit of knowledge. I wanted understanding. I wanted knowledge. I wanted to know what's going on here. What is this all about? So when I started meditation, I immediately had a profound experience and continued in that path for at least 12 to 15 years. From 72, I became a teacher in 73 and taught about 300 people over the course of 12 years. And all the time, there was something that didn't quite light my fire. There was always this carrot at the end of the pole. If you meditate long enough, you do enough asanas, if you somehow can accomplish all these things, you'll get to the carrot. But the carrot always moved away. But I did have some profound experiences in that time.
Did you come to give it up entirely or just partially?
I've never given it up. I love meditation. I love the quietness. I love to just sit and be quiet.
Do you still practice TM?
I haven't used, I don't even remember the mantras. It's been so long since sometime in the mid 80s till 1990. Somewhere in there the mantras fell away. And then Sai Baba's name became my mantra for probably a few years. Then the quietness in meditation became so palpable, mantra just sort of disturbed the quietness. It wasn't of any value anymore.
Can I take a
That doesn't mean I won't use a mantra now. Sometimes I like to have a mantra, and I may pick up some mantra, but it just comes and goes of its own.
People watch this from all backgrounds. Who knows who's watching this right now, and I'd like your permission to take a brief detour. Since you taught TM, you still practice meditation. For those of you who, and there seem to be an endless number of people for whom it's hopelessly impossible to quiet the mind, as hard as they try, is there any insights or special little knowledge that you can shed on how people might learn to do so, regardless of the practice they follow?
I think the biggest hurdle is thinking that we have to quiet the mind. You know, if you look up at the sky is enormous. You look up in an enormous blue sky. A little blackbird flies across, and what do you see? You see a little blackbird, and you focus on the little blackbird. The material that goes on in the mind is like the blackbird. The sky is the consciousness. The quietness represents the sky. 99% of the mind is completely quiet. 1% is focused on the little blackbird, which is all the mentality going on. Consciousness is like an ocean. Actually, the ocean's like a drop in consciousness, but for this analogy, consciousness is like an ocean. The mental activity is like a fish swimming in the ocean. The ocean is not disturbed by the fish, even if it's a giant whale, which sometimes their mind seems to be. Meditation, from my perspective, is about honoring stillness, honoring that vast sky. Just as one sits, let's say, to study physics or computers or anything, at that time we're honoring the capacity to study and we're honoring that which we're studying. So meditation is a time to honor the unknown, the quietness, honoring that which we don't know. So if we sit with the attitude of honoring stillness, the stillness will become more apparent. It'll become more friendly to us. We develop a relationship with that quietness through the honoring. But I would say that thought or the prospect of trying to quiet the mind is the problem, not the mind itself. I wouldn't even try to quiet the mind, just honor the stillness. That's all I do now. I just sit and say, okay, stillness, here I am. You see, if a beautiful woman shows up, in honoring her, she becomes more beautiful. Like that.
Mm-hmm.
Or like people who can feed wild birds from their hand. They don't try to grab the bird. If you do, you'll never grab the bird. They simply wait.
Mm-hmm.
They learn to be quiet and wait, and the bird will come and eat. It's like that with quietness. But my take on meditation is meditation does not necessarily lead to some profound awakening. It may or may not, I don't know. The thing about meditation, thing about the practice of meditation, first of all, is not for everybody. I don't think it's for everybody. If you're drawn to meditation, great. If you're not, great. But as I see the value of meditation, it's cultivating an inner capacity for subtle discernment. There's a capacity to discern that is a bit transcendent to conceptualized thinking. No amount of conceptualized thinking can lead to complete transcendence, where the mind is absolutely quiet. No amount of conceptualized thinking can lead to that. Conceptualized thinking just leads to more conceptualized thinking. But the capacity for subtle discernment, which meditation cultivates, is very powerful. Because the inner nature, it's a matter of recognition. And that recognition, like I said before, only someone from Tamil Nadu will immediately recognize another Tamil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was flying on a plane once, and the pilot came on and made an announcement. I said to my friend who was sitting, I said, that guy's from East Tennessee, where I grew up. Mm. And I called the stewardess and said, where's that guy from? She said, oh, he's from Bristol, Tennessee. See, it's a recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So by cultivating the subtle capacity of the mind, that's where that recognition happens. The gross mind, the noisy mind, is not what recognizes the transcendent inner quality. It's the inner quality itself, recognizing itself. So what we call realization or recognition, it doesn't happen on the grosser mind. It doesn't happen on the grosser mind. It happens in the subtle mind.
And I like so much the way you put it, using the phrase to honor the quiet, to honor the space, because that takes the onus off me. I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, beautiful, yeah.
The practice I've been slaving over for years has been to require me to go from A to B to C, and I've often wondered why I'm just spinning my wheels. I was lacking the ability to honor the space.
Yeah.
The awareness of it. And that leads me to a comment you said just before we turned the camera on that I'd like you to comment on, because it also helped me see things differently by changing the context. You said you don't have to fix the personal self to know God.
Yeah, why? Why would you have to fix it?
Well, because we're raised from childhood to think that we're broken and we have to fix ourselves first.
All right, well, I'm going to give one context for it, which may be different. We could have 1,000 contexts, 1,000 ways, 1,000,000 ways to talk about it. I'm going to give one that may be a little different than what other people have given. Our mental framework, our behavioral modalities are based on millions of years of learning. It goes back to the first amoeba on the planet. I'm not saying this is how it is, I'm just saying this is a context. It's just a way of following the pointers. When you look at the history of how this all come about, I get this from watching animals. And I love chickens. I like to keep chickens around. And I watch them a lot. And I noticed that the women, the female chickens, liked a rooster who could dominate them. Certainly he would cause them pain, but somehow they were always drawn to the rooster that was the most dominant. So not that they conceptualize, but they're drawn to someone who can dominate them because he will also protect them. Because if he can dominate them, he can dominate their enemies. Something like that goes through. So that's in our biological DNA. That's a motivational factor. Now, what was the original question are we dealing with?
That we don't have to fix our personal self
Yeah.
in order to know God.
Okay, so this is part of the personal self. Then we call it the alpha male. We say the alpha male is the one who will run the tribe, flock, group, whatever. It's true. And you can, if you study the real writings about Native Americans, I'm part Cherokee, you'll find this to be true. The tribe would tend to follow the alpha male. If he can dominate me, he will protect me. Now, what does the alpha male? The alpha male has a demand. Do it my way. Either if you don't do it my way, you're out. And if you're out, you're dead.
Pretty good incentive to follow his lead.
Yeah, very good incentive to follow the alpha male. And so, as religion crept into this process, and the whole prospect of their being a God. This would take a long conversation to go into in detail. I'm going to give some highlights. This alpha male motive, this alpha male operandi, is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
Crept in. That God must be the ultimate alpha male. And that we better, if we're going to stay in his good favor, we better follow his rules. So we've already told God, give us a set of rules. And in fact, I think the great historical significance, the great historical symbol is Moses and the Ten Commandments. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure God really needed to give us a set of rules, but we required God to in a certain sense. So what does he do? Gives it chiseled into stone. It's mind-blowing when you really think about it. So it's so embedded in us to follow the rules to win the favor of the alpha male, the great ultimate alpha male. And then, in fact, the stakes get even higher because we're not just talking about an animal trying to stay in the flock, because an animal has also an instinct to know that it really is not mortal, that it's just a stream of mortality that it's living in. Now the stakes are even higher because we've developed, along with that, we've developed a concept of ourselves as individuals. We've developed a personal conceptual paradigm of identity. And we want that personal conceptual identity to survive what we call death. So now the stakes are even higher because now the great alpha male becomes ultimate heaven or ultimate loss from the tribe. Eternal, we call it. So that's so embedded,
So to depart from that is almost heresy. In fact,
Yeah.
for many people it is heresy.
Oh, it's the most frightening thing. That's why the most intense war on the planet is always about religion. Because
So-
now the stakes are the highest. So an implication here is that by perfecting our personal self, we can come closer to God. And I'm not saying that's not true, but I'm proposing perhaps it's a construct that has arisen within what we call the evolution of human being. It's not, I'm proposing that perhaps it's not a requirement of God, but it's a requirement that we place on God. And not that we can easily erase that. It's not even to be erased, it's just to be observed. And I think, I would say no matter how highly realized, at least for myself, how highly realized I may become, hopefully I'll still pursue this impossible prospect of perfecting myself in the personal portion of myself. I don't know.
You talked a fair amount about Sai Baba. Do you think he requires that of you?
I would, from my experience, Baba requires what you expect him to require. If you go to Puttaparthi and your heart's desire is to prove that Baba is a fake magician, he will give you all the evidence you need. And you will walk away completely convinced that he is a fraud and a fake. Baba demonstrated this very clearly to me. In one of the dream, what we call dream, but those of us who know Baba know that experiences with Baba that come when we're sleeping are make this seem like the dream. Anyhow, I was with Baba and this particular dream experience, I'm going to call it dream, but for the sake of conversation. Baba was a professor, and I was a member of the class. I was a rogue member. I told Baba very early on in the class, I said, Baba, I don't want to hear your teachings. I don't care about your lectures. It's not what I'm here for. I just want you. I don't care about the teachings. Anyhow, I observed Baba in the class and what he was doing. And when I walked into the class, I was shocked to see that one of the students' name was someone that I know very well who hates Baba with a vengeance. I walked into the class and I saw he's one of the students. I was shocked. I was like, why would he be in Baba's class? It doesn't make sense to me. But then Baba began to instruct everyone. And my friend, who hates Baba with a vengeance, everybody in the class had a project. Each person had a project they were working on. And Baba would go and he'd be behind them, whisper in their ear, helping them with their project, whatever project they had. And this fellow's project was to prove how bad Baba is, what a fake he is. Baba was here pointing to all the evidence, helping him uncover evidence that absolutely proved Baba's a fake and a fraud. And Baba gave him as much love, as much attention. If you were trying to prove Baba was a god, Baba didn't, he the same. He was helping each person. And that was like, okay, I don't know who this Sai Baba is, but I just know I love him. And that's all I need to know.
And whether he reflects to you who you think you are today or who you think you are tomorrow, and he reflects that to you, it doesn't make any difference to you, obviously.
I don't understand the question.
Whether you began this by saying he gives you what you expect him to give you. In other words, if you're looking...
Yeah, but that has to be qualified, because what you really expect may not be what you think you expect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for example, we met a man when I was in Party at the ashram, we met a man who had come there to kill Baba. Very early on in Baba's career. And this man was trained to kill a man. He knew, I forget, he told us he knew 2 or 3 ways he could immediately kill a man with his bare hands. He was very highly trained and commissioned to come and kill Baba. So, when he sat for darshan, he said when Baba walked out, he saw this blue light. It had no form, it was just a blue light that moved amongst the crowd. And he began to scratch his head and he thought, well, I can kill any person with my bare hands, but I don't know how to kill a blue light. So, in a sense, Baba fulfilled his wish. There was no form there, so Baba was dead to him already. He had fulfilled his mission. He stayed and served in the ashram for the next 30 years until, that was when I saw him, and I don't know if he's still there, but he was quite old at the time. Whereas if somebody came and they wanted, I saw one video where somebody had proved that Baba's faking his materializations by pulling something out from under a table. So that was the guy's desire, and Baba very cleverly did it. As though millions of people who watch Baba materialize everything every day are so stupid, but this guy's so brilliant he could actually film it. I thought that was, I just think it's magnificent. I just love it. You know, the first materialization Baba did for my family was in I guess it was late 1990, it was late 1990. I came back from having Baba's darshan, and I felt so fulfilled and so satisfied. I'm so delighted. I don't want to talk too much about that part, but I did have one desire, and that was to take my family. my wife and children. If I could just bring them to have darshan, then my life would be completely fulfilled. Although the knowledge piece had not been satisfied, there was some of the edge was taken off because I felt such relief and confidence to have Baba in that spiritual quest. So this desire came in my mind, and the wife saw such a dramatic transformation in me just from going to India and seeing Swami. Because I had done so many years of meditation, so many self-help workshops and courses and programs, yada yada, with very little transformation. Now I go off to India and come back, and she's like shocked. How could this guy be so transformed just from going to India and seeing this guy? I was only there for 10 days, 2 weeks. How could that be? So she got a desire to see Baba. And here we were, we had this desire to see Swami. I had been in the hospital. We had bought a house and borrowed the money for the down payment, and my business was shutting down for the winter. We had very little money. How were we going to go to India? We didn't have any clue. We just had a desire. Then one day she was, I wasn't there at the time. She was cleaning, working on the house, trying to straighten it up. And a thought came in her mind to go look in her blouse. In a certain blouse, she kept an envelope there, and sometimes if we had extra money, we put it in that envelope and we donate it to different things that we felt drawn to. And she tried to get this thought out of her mind and continue with her work because it was distracting her. And so she, then finally she concluded, okay, let me go look so this thought will leave me alone. And when she looked in the blouse, the envelope was full of something. She took the envelope out and started counting $100 bills. When we called the travel agent, it was exactly how much we needed for our round trip to India. Neither one of us questioned. Immediately we knew the money. Baba gave us the money to come to India. Baba was fulfilling our desire. So I don't know anyone who thinks Baba's a fake magician. Let him explain that one. Anyhow, if anyone wants to know that Baba's a fake magician, then by all means think that and pursue it.
And your story isn't the only story. Obviously, those of us who are aware of this place called Puttaparthi, we've heard countless stories like this. And I often wonder, are they embellished? Are they exaggerated? But no, it always turns out that the people swear they had nothing. They had no money, let alone the exact amount of money required to take their family to India.
So many times.
But this all pivots around some instinctive urge on your part to think about exploring her blouse to see what was in that pocket. So the idea doesn't just materialize out of thin air, does it? It's sort of planted there.
I wouldn't dare try to explain it. You know, I'm like a child. I don't want to hear an explanation. Just the thrill of it. You know, and in a way, all these materializations are meaningless in themselves. What's the point? $2,200, whatever it was, $2,400 a trip to India. It's meaningless by itself. If Baba materializes $1 billion ring and puts it on your finger, it's meaningless by itself. The question is, what about the transformation? Is there transformation in the person? That's the point.
So what accounted for your huge, enormous transformation after seeing Baba, as your wife said, for a mere 10 or 12 days at a time?
It's I would say it's just the field, what's called the morphic field. What's that scientist's name that has developed the understanding of morphic fields? Sheldrake. Sheldrake, a genius, talks about this morphic field. Everything has a morphic field. But it's Baba's morphic field. You could call it his aura, his energy, his presence. It has an impact on everything. It has a great impact.
And as we're talking about Baba, go ahead, Jody. The logical question, how did it transform you? Because it sounded like you were already pretty much a cooked potato to begin with.
Well, before I went to India at that point, that quest for knowledge, I'm just realizing part of what had happened was that all the knowledge I'd picked up till then gave me a kind of false satisfaction, so to speak. Some of it was real experience and real knowledge. A lot of it was just in my head, was just in this conceptual framework about God, life, spirituality, and the whole smear. But right before I went to India, I had reached a kind of plateau, so to speak, and just nothing interested me. Nothing. The knowledge that I thought was real at the time had not totally satisfied me. It had given me a false satisfaction. But nothing else in life interested me. Just no interest. It wasn't like depression. It was just total lack of interest. And I think I was dying. Physically, I don't think I would have lived much longer.
It sounds
Just
like
from
you,
lack of interest, nothing was there.
It
But then
like
when
you
I
were becoming your father.
Huh?
That's the way you began, by describing your father.
maybe in some way. But when I saw Baba, it's like a whole new world opened up. And then just great fascination with what is he all about? What are all these amazing miracles and stories? And it opened up a whole new universe for me that still ceaselessly amazes me. These miracles and phenomena and Leela of Baba that are just endless and filled with indescribable delights and treasures. Oh my gosh, it just go on and on.
So who is Sai Baba?
I think, again, from my perspective, I wouldn't qualify Baba as a who. That's the first step.
All right, what is Sai Baba?
It would work better if we say, what is Sai Baba? I don't even know if we can put a what there, but my experience leads me to conclude that nothing can ever define Sai Baba. Nothing can ever define. We have discovered 300 billion galaxies. 300 billion galaxies in this universe. I don't know how many more universes exist. Each of those 300 billion galaxies, how many solar systems they contain, how many planets they contain, how many forms of life, what's all there. Every bit of that is an attempt to define Sai Baba. Is an attempt to define. And the reason it constantly changes is because each attempt fails. Mm-hmm. If we ever had an attempt that succeeded in defining Sai Baba, it would no longer change. It could no longer change.
Let me narrow the question. What is Sai Baba in Allan Morelock's life?
There's just no distinction. There's no distinction. There's nothing that I can point at and say, there's Sai Baba, or there is not Sai Baba. There's just no distinction. So, and yet there is for me a continual drinking of the nectar of loving Baba, as though Baba and I are two. It's an ongoing play. It's an ongoing exercise for discovery. See, if you sit in a tub of warm water, it's very pleasurable. But if you sit still too long, you don't feel the pleasure. So you move around, you create some waves. And you enjoy the warm water. Otherwise, you forget. You forget. Some people talk about moksha, liberation, this kind of realization or awakening. That can happen in its own time. But for me, I'm assuming I'll always be thrilled by the presumption that I'm a separate being from Baba and that I love him.
You don't think you can bridge that duality gap in this lifetime?
It's not in my hands to say.
Do you make any effort to?
Do I make an effort to? I may sometimes. I may sometimes. But there's a bigger operating factor, I would say. And that operating factor is allowing, when it comes to that, I call it the mother. I just say it's up to the mother. Whatever mother wishes will happen, whatever she chooses. And I don't presume that she knows what she's going to choose ahead of time, although I would like to. I'd like to think she's got a plan and that she's going to take care of me, but I don't presume it. I always just say, so many times my friends will say, okay, when are you going to do this? When are you going to come there? And I just say, it's up to her. Mother will choose.
You mentioned the mantras that you have learned and since forgotten over your decades. What do you make of Baba's one and only mantra that he says he gives to people? I am God, I am God, I am no different from God.
That's great. It's great. If you're drawn to practice it, practice it. I try to practice this so-hum thing. And every time I try to practice it, the so turns into sai, and the hum turns into om. And it's just on my breath, sai, om, sai, om.
Why don't you just switch it to sai om?
It's just, I can't get it back. It's just there. And that's what happens. It's always sai, om. But I guess I have my own experience of Om, and I have my own experience of Sai, and so Hum is like a foreign language. Sai Om is my language, so it comes like that.
You're among the
if I need to feel a little, like if I'm wanting to sleep and I'm restless and I want to have some comfort to kind of lull myself, to relax my body or whatever, then I just think Sai Om. Sai as I breathe in, Om as I breathe out. And it helps comfort the outer expression, the physical and the mental and all that.
Certainly touches all the bases, doesn't it?
I don't know. I'm not recommending it, I'm just saying that's what happens.
Do you still crave knowledge?
Do I still crave knowledge? My daughter has a baby. She wanted to have a baby, and she finally had a baby. The baby's 4 months old today, or within a few days right now. And all she thinks about is the baby. All she wants to do is play with the baby and hold it and watch her grow and watch her develop. So that which I call knowledge, it's my primary baby. I'm always thinking of the baby, nurturing the baby, watching it grow, watching it develop. Do I crave it? I don't know. Yes and no. Yes and no. I think the exploration of the mystery is endless. There can be no end to the exploration of the mystery. If there were an end to it, how could it be a mystery? It would just be a temporary. It's not a temporary mystery. It's not a passing mystery. It's ultimate mystery. It's a mystery of all mysteries. So there's an endless exploration of it. I would say I'm not searching for it, I'm researching. It's a different thing. It doesn't have the same negative push, but it has a positive appeal. Because even as I'm playing, researching the mystery. At the same time, I know I am the mystery. I know I am. I don't know it like a thought or an idea. I know it through experience. There's no way I can not know it, but yet the thrill of the exploration goes on. And the layer of myself, the portion of myself that delights in the prospect of serving the mystery. It's another dream within the dream, but it's a sweet dream.
Allan, I met one of your children, your grandchildren. She's 4, just about the same age you were when you had this grand awareness of your identity, your origin.
Devastating awareness.
and your vow that you would return there. Let's project 20 years henceforth when she's 24, and if she were standing before you with eyes and ears open, and you had an hour, if you had 5 minutes, what would you want to tell her that she might take to heart the most, that would be of the greatest usefulness for her questing, for her exploring the mystery of life?
It's way too hypothetical to answer. I would say if I were, I hope I don't give advice. I really don't like the prospect of giving advice to anyone. It's disrespectful to the person. It's irreverent to the truth that I know that person is as completely God as any other person, including Allan. I rarely give advice. Occasionally I'll give advice to someone for something specific. The only generic advice that I give so far without hesitation is to have gratitude. I would say gratitude is the one spiritual practice, spiritual or not, that is the most universal, that is the most, the most universally applicable. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's a complete novice or beginner on the spiritual path can find gratitude. Just look for something and be grateful for it. Be grateful that you have life. Be grateful that you can be grateful. And no matter how advanced a person may be, gratitude is a suitable practice. Finding gratitude. In fact, beginning gratitude may be just coercing yourself, not forcing yourself. I never like when people take one part of themselves and pit it against another part. It will always recreate duality and conflict. And part of what I see as my role is to contribute to non-conflict as much as possible. I'm not even saying there's something wrong or evil about conflict. It's just my role. So there's always something you could just, if you're not feeling gratitude, you can always write down, okay, I'm grateful I can still breathe. I'm grateful that there's sunshine today. I'm grateful that there's clouds because they mean rain. Just practice writing a few things down. And like everything is a skill that's learned and developed. So that muscle, that capacity to be grateful grows. With time, gratitude becomes devotion. With time, gratitude becomes comfort. It becomes ease. It becomes acceptance. It becomes tolerance. And at some point, it takes on a flavor of love. And then at higher vibration, takes on devotion. Where there is true devotion, I would say devotion with balance. Just outright devotion itself, I don't know where it would lead. But devotion with balance means there should be understanding. There should be discernment,
Mm-hmm.
capacity to discern, discriminate. Devotion is far more powerful than understanding. Understanding is very limited. If we take anything, something simple, a pencil, or a pen, a bottle, a tube of toothpaste, take something a very simple object, and try to understand it. You could spend years trying to understand a tube of toothpaste. How was it made? Where was it made? What are the ingredients? How did it come in? How did the formulas get created? Who are the people who worked in the factory? You couldn't. How long it would take to understand a tube of toothpaste? There are 300 billion known galaxies. I can't. You only look at. There's a glass of water sitting there. How long would it take me to really understand that glass of water? And there's thousands of objects in the room. How much can you understand?
Mm-hmm.
Devotion. When devotion comes, the mind cannot, at some point, the mind can no longer withstand the nectar, the sweetness of devotion, and the mind gets absorbed into the heart. If there's maturity, consciousness remains, mind gets absorbed in the heart. And I'm not talking about the physical heart, I'm talking about a deeper heart. Depending on the stage of development, it may be the heart chakra, but there's a deeper heart than that. When that absorption comes, the mind, which is a capacity to know, merges into the pure capacity to know. And that is what knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
That is the knowing, the knowingness that's in all humans. Really, it's in all life forms, but it's most wondrous in a human, because the human has the capacity to know knowingness. Through this bridge, through this complexity and difficult paradigm of human identity. It's a bridge, it's a mechanism through which knowingness can know itself. Because in consciousness, in pure knowingness, there's no intelligence. Consciousness in its purest state is not intelligent. The way, if you look if you go in the ocean, deep in the ocean, you don't see any waves. Waves come upon the ocean. Waves don't create the ocean. Waves come upon the ocean. Intelligence arises from the depth of consciousness. And intelligence is the capacity to know, is the capacity to understand. And then within intelligence arises this other layer of the known, what is known. And so no amount of what can be known reveals the ocean, just as no amount of waves reveals the depth of the ocean. These are all analogies, and no analogy is complete in itself. The only analogy is life.
And life is something that is for you and Jody and me, three different meanings until we get to the end of the line where we see it's all one. I mean, that's too simple a thought put forth. I guess I guess I'm still struck by what you said about parceling out advice, that you're again it. And I understand because you said it so well. And yet on the other hand, I also know you to be a mentor.
It's interesting how I noticed recently, that this role of spiritual teacher has come. And I thought about it and I realized, okay, somehow this desire arose to be a spiritual teacher. I'm not quite sure how or why it arose, but now it's here. It has to run its course. Being a spiritual teacher is not necessarily a stage of human evolution. It's not necessary. It's not required from the standpoint of consciousness itself. Could as well have had a desire to be a farmer. Mm-hmm. Just grow potatoes. Could as well have a desire to be a janitor in a high school. It's all the same. It's all the same. Whatever desire comes. Not that simple. It's not that simple. But like that, somehow this arose. So I've had to just watch that and participate in it. You don't get your job done purely by watching. But it's good to observe, mm-hmm. so that there's space around anything and everything. A sense of presence that's bigger than anything and everything. You know, somehow in my life I've been very, very blessed, very, very fortunate. Only by grace, purely by grace. So many profound experiences have come here. And I love to remember them, I love to think about them. And someone, I was leading a satsang somewhere and somebody said, would you tell us your greatest experience? Immediately, without any thought, a response came and I said, the greatest spiritual experience I've had is the experience that everyone is having all the time. That is, that I'm aware that I exist. How can there be a greater spiritual experience than that? For me, my life has been, it's had this element of pursuit. I'm going to call it pursuit of higher thought. Of always challenging every thought, every idea, every concept that could come in my mind. And until I could find ideas that I could just not destruct or challenge anymore. And that helped develop an unending sense of consciousness itself. In India, it's called Shiva. That's my interpretation. But along the way, there are certain thoughts or concepts that I could no longer break down or destruct. One of those is that to honor no future possibility with greater reverence than the stillness that is with me now, that is always with me. And the reason I said what I said about there can be no greater experience than being aware that I exist. But if I'm not aware I exist, there is no experience. That's the platform, that's the basis of everything. So in a sense, that is God. Mm-hmm. I'm aware I exist. That's the treasure. That's the great, great treasure.
And it's there for all of us to discover.
Of course, of course, of course.
So many people
It's,
seem
it's
to-
the whole life, every human. There's no each human, each being is a palpable physical representation of God pursuing himself, herself. God is almighty. God created everything. The creation arose out of God. So if God wants to find himself, which is basically what a human with a soul is God pursuing himself. It's only a matter of time. At some point it involves relaxation and letting go. But for me, that's my dharma, that's my truth. Every living, ensouled human is the ultimate creator of everything, exploring, revealing himself to himself, herself.
Allan Morelock, thank you very much. God bless you richly, and Sairam.
Thank you. Formidable barriers. One day I looked out at that tree, and that tree is really crooked and distorted, and it's got some openings in it. And I realized, that it's still a great tree. Just good shade. It's beautiful. I really love having that tree there. It's fulfilled itself, even though it has a lot of distortions. So the distortions mean all the ways in which personally I'm incapable, I screw up, I hurt people, I do all these things wrong, I have desires, blah, blah, blah. But they're still, still what I am. A lot of unnecessary burdens, barriers between us and awakening.
An awakening.
And, yeah. There's an awakening process that those who are drawn to it, out of fear and anger and desire, that's also, I shouldn't. You do have.
Aspect, did you mean the urgency, the need for, do you have